Emily, aka the infamous people pleaser. Welcome to Mint. How you doing?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm feeling great, feeling alive, excited to be sharing the next hour with you, talking about all things people pleaser art, Shibuya, and everything in between. I think a good place to start, Emily, is for those who don't know you and are not familiar with your awesome work. Who are you? What does the world need to know about you? Let's start there, and then we'll take it forward.
For sure. So I am a digital artist of sorts, and I have been working in visual effects and the computer graphics animation industry for over 6 years before I started working in crypto. And my relationship with crypto, I think, began in 2017, where I bought some ICO shitcoins back in the day and rode the bull run all the way up. And then, when the bear market hit, I sort of went back to focusing on my regular career. And then I essentially became unemployed and during sort of just before the pandemic. And then, so I was like unemployed for over a year. And during this time, I was looking into alternate revenue streams. And then, so that's when I sort of dove into crypto again. And then I was introduced to DeFi summer. And then, so I sort of people pleaser brand within crypto started because I was making these little animations that helped promote DeFi protocols. And they were usually sort of my way to digest all the like white paper information that I was like, reading and then make it sort of represent it in like a fun, understandable way for a more wide audience like us. And then, yeah, slowly I, worked with pretty much every DeFi brand that there was. And then in 2021, I worked with Uniswap to make the V3 announcement. And then that video went viral and then I auctioned it off as an NFT and then it sold for 310 ETH. And a bunch of people got together to bid on it and created PleasrDAO. So yeah, that was sort of like the moment that kind of established, I could say maybe like my magnum opus in the NFT space. And then since then, I've been doing always sort of anything that involves the intersection of like art, crypto, DAOs, and NFTs. So for example, I see that you have two of the Fortune magazines.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Part of those caricatures are like, this is like the perfect sort of resemblance of to put words to an image. Yes.
Yeah, these are rare. Did you buy them when they came out?
Yes. I went to the newsstand and I picked them up.
Nice. Yeah, so that was also in 2021. And then I also, did other things within the NFT space, like, collaborations with Steve Aoki. We sold something at Sotheby's. And, I'm trying to think of like the other stuff that I did that year. I also helped crowdfund for the Ethereum documentary. And then last year I launched Shibuya, which is my sort of latest project, let's say. I still consider it a project, but it's basically a company now. And it is a sort of a platform that, uses Web3 technology and also now AI, where we help create tools for people or creators to easily be able to either fund their ideas or artistic tools to make, sort of a representation of your ideas or creation of IP even easier and faster. And the first IP that we're making on there is our own, which is sort of a passion project of mine. It's called White Rabbit, and it's an anime short film that is similar to the Fortune magazine cover, or I actually also did the like a Vogue Taiwan cover last year as well.
Oh, cool.
All of my art is usually sort of depicting, the current state of, it's like subtle, right? It's, when you look at it, it could just be art, but, when you look at it more, then you understand like the meaning behind it. And then, so that's kind of what White Rabbit is as well. It's a metaphorical piece of depicting sort of everybody's experience of going down the crypto rabbit hole. But obviously, if you're not in the space and you don't know how to look out for those Easter eggs and stuff and you just watch it, then it just like regular, normal film to you. So yeah, that's kind of the general theme of my art. And yeah.
What does it feel like to have a bunch of cryptic gals and guys with a lot of money create a fan club around your name and start purchasing really cool things using your brand. What does that feel like?
It feels definitely surreal. I think I tried to explain this to somebody the other day who's not in the space, because they were like, what's PleasrDAO? And I was like, well, it's kind of like a company, but it's not my company, but it's named after me. Just in explaining it, I was like, this sounds really ridiculous and sounds almost fake, honestly. I think it's just a testament that life is honestly so random, and you can do as much as you want to sort of prepare, but you just genuinely never know what's going to happen. And obviously it's been like a nice community for me, just to actually make friends with a lot of really cool people who are now still good friends in my life, and learn a lot. And yeah, it's funny because at the time that PleasrDAO was born, it was just guys. There was one gal and it was me. So people often joke that it was like the original Simp DAO.
The original OG Simp DAO.
Now we have gals, so that's good.
Amazing. So when your parents ask, or when you try to explain to your parents what PleasrDAO is and all the things that you're doing in crypto and Web3, how do you typically approach that conversation?
I typically don't with my parents' friends, let's say, but with my specific parents, I think they are quite sort of up to date and open-minded about a lot of things. So they actually were around, when the Uniswap thing happened, when PleasrDAO happened. So they're pretty caught up. So it's not like I have to actually explain. I think even including Shibuya, they have a pretty good understanding of what it does and what it is and what I'm doing. So that's been really nice.
Solid. And one thing you didn't talk about your intro is your features in like Hollywood films, and getting involved in like the cinematography and getting credits in these really big blockbuster films. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Sure. So I was working in post-production. So, we were doing all things visual effects for big blockbuster films, such as, Wonder Woman or Star Trek Beyond, Batman vs. Superman. I think the best movie I've ever worked on is this movie called The Emoji Movie. I'm totally joking. They literally won the Razzie Award for worst movie of the year.
I remember that movie though.
Yeah. Do you know this YouTube channel called Honest Trailers?
Yes.
So I obviously was a huge fan of that YouTube channel, and my name made it into the Honest Trailers of the Emoji Movie, because in the Honest Trailers, they were scrubbing through the credits really fast, and they were like, oh, we just want to say sorry to all the people who worked really hard on this film, not for the mean comments we made about the movie, but for the lost years of your life or something.
Jesus.
But I consider that a special moment. Who cares about being on the cover of Fortune or Vogue when you get into 3 microseconds of Honest Trailers?
That's probably your most memorable W by far, I'd argue. By far. I'm curious how that sort of influenced your approach to creating digital art.
Well, I think it shaped it a lot. My story about that started when I was in college. When I was in my first year of college, I watched WALL-E for the first time. And then I sort of immediately fell in love with the movie. The first half doesn't even have dialogue, but that just goes to show, sort of how powerful of a storytelling tool it was. And at the time, I thought what I wanted to do was animation because I had watched this amazing movie. And so I went online and Googled how to get a job at Pixar. And then I started learning 3D and all these tools. And then I think sort of like a few years into my career that I actually realized that all this time, I don't think it was ever about wanting to work on the next biggest Hollywood film or animation even. And that it was more, my passion was actually around storytelling. And, what I thought drew me in for WALL-E was the animation was actually, successful storytelling. So it doesn't matter if it's live action or animated. I think that's just what I'm passionate about. And so, but I think the years working in that field were absolutely necessary for me to learn the technical skills to be able to convey my thoughts, because, I'm not like a film director, so I'm not going to go out and shoot a live action film right now. I am an animator, but sort of emotions and themes can be conveyed in so many different ways. And my way of conveying it thus far has been animation. And I think without technical skill, you can't really target your ideas with precision, right? So I think those years were super necessary for me to learn the skills and brush up on that before I started executing on my own creative ideas.
That makes sense. And I guess as you execute more on your own ideas, do you think your work is more defined as familiar or something novel? How would you define it?
I think I like to juggle that line a lot. So it has to be somewhat novel, but novel enough that people find it interesting, and familiar enough, but not too familiar, so that people might, think it's been done before. Or there needs to be some level of familiarity for people to relate to it, or to understand it. But then it also has to have the right level of novelty. And with that, I think I usually have some pretty concrete ways of targeting that. So, I think a good measure is if people's reactions to the things that I make are kind of more on the what in the world that I just watched level, then it means that I did a good job making something somewhat novel.
Can you talk about that more in the context of White Rabbit? Because if you go to Shibuya's website and the White Rabbit video is there, and I watched it, and it's really beautifully done. So props to you and the team. And it feels familiar yet novel. So I'm trying to understand, like, in the context of that framing, how would you go and describe it? And how would you approach the creation of that video using that framing?
Well, I think with White Rabbit specifically, the familiarity comes from the sort of references and influence and art style that it uses, which, we draw a lot of influence. I mean, I work with, my co-founder, Mache Kuchiara. He's an amazing artist. And, mainly the reason why White Rabbit looks so amazing is, we draw a lot of reference from Studio Ghibli movies and just, really old school 80s anime in general. I feel like modern anime has a very, very different look than that sort of any anime that came out in the 80s, 90s era. And so that's kind of the look that we target. So I feel like that's where the familiarity comes from. But the novel part comes from the fact that, it is a new age film. So we are, first of all, making it about crypto or even the metaverse. And so, there's a lot of like glitching going on, but then you see sort of like these mystical creatures like a fox and, in these like grassy nature backgrounds. But then there's, things that kind of resemble like a new age or like new technology, things that, also appear. So it creates this very sort of paradoxical, uncanny feeling when you're watching it. And that's something that I'm personally pretty interested in creating. So,
I watched it and I was really amazed with the quality and from the music, all the background noises, the conversation, the dialogue. And I can't help but wonder what actually goes into creating a video like that. And there's so many moving parts. My first question is how big is the team right now that went to contributing to that video? And the second question is like, what goes into actually creating a video like White Rabbit? How do you do that?
It's quite similar to a traditional sort of pipeline for creating animation. We are currently, I think, around about a team of 15 artists working on White Rabbit. It initially started the first chapter, like just the first minute or so, was actually literally just me and Mache, just the two of us creating that content. He literally made the music himself as well. And then after that, we were able to put it on Shibuya, and then we raised some capital from the sale of NFTs to be able to then continue funding the development of the series, which is really cool because this is something that we didn't have to pitch to Hollywood or wait for anybody to sort of greenlight the project, which usually takes years, by the way, if you were to go about it in a traditional way. And so we were just kind of able to come out and be like, we want to make this, and we are making it. And then the audience can not only, participate, but also interact with the series and just get a very close-up and personal and invested experience of the creation of this film. And the rest of it sort of involves Michelle and I sitting down, thinking about, the general, I would say, rough skeleton of a story, because it is interactive and the audience are helping to shape specific details of the story. So we kind of have a node graph of the main spine, and then, it kind of like branches off into different possibilities. And then when the audience sort of decides on a path, then we kind of zoom in and then map out the details of that specific route. But there is a general theme, and it's talking about, themes of self-sovereignty, freedom of choice, freedom of choice, and building sort of your own types of governance and, path to economic freedom, essentially. And a lot of it is also about, with new types of technology, the outcome really depends on the intentions of people who use it. And so, yeah, these are the general themes of the film. And after we write the story, then, the typical animation process is we do a storyboard, and then we, hire animators or people to create the assets, and then we start animating, and, pushes down the animation pipeline. Then after animation, we do FX, and then lighting rendering, and then compositing. And then, score usually happens around the same time too. And for chapter 2 and chapter 3, we were able to hire people to write the score. Chapter 2 was composed by super talented composer. His name is Gavin Brivik. And chapter 3 was composed by actually our screenwriter, Anthony Scott Burns. He's also a Canadian filmmaker, super talented Renaissance man. So it's nice because I feel like with each new chapter, we can have maybe a slightly different style of composer or musician come in and, add their own flavor to it, but it still has this overall theme, or I guess vibe that White Rabbit has.
As a collector myself, I can't help but wonder how fun it could be to actually contribute to a project like White Rabbit and help dictate the plot and direction in which things go. And I try to put myself in your shoes and in your partner's shoes and try to think, wow, you guys are your own creative individuals with your own ideas, with your own vision as to how you see things forming. There must be a clash between the collector's opinion and you and your partner's creative direction. And my question is one, like, what does that happen often? And how do you navigate situations like those?
I think we've been pretty careful about the way that we put out our content and, have our community engage. And I think something that we've been actually pretty lucky with so far is that the taste of the community or the collectors is actually pretty high, in my opinion. And so there's a good balance between their taste versus their trust in me and Michelle's sort of decision making. Because actually a lot of times what you'll learn is that even as collectors or the community, they don't actually want to be dictating everything within creation of a film. It has to be the right balance. I think most of them actually prefer to be spoon-fed content with just a little sprinkle of their opinions. And so that's kind of the way that we've been going about it with White Rabbit. And that way, people feel like they are taking part and they are participating without actually draining too much of their time and resources into something that they are not professionally trained to do, right? So I think a good case study or example of this is, sometimes things are just so obvious that, had you just asked the audience first or did something that's direct to community, you would have saved a lot of money. So let's take, I don't know if you remember the Sonic the Hedgehog movie that came out a few years ago. When it first came out, I think the first trailer or something, the way that Sonic was designed was honestly horrendous. Actually just so terribly ugly. And I don't know who at what level of the studio actually decided to make it look like that. But, obviously when the trailer came out, the audience were like, what is this design? This is terrible. We hate this. And then so they actually literally took the audience's opinion and then went back and redesigned Sonic the Hedgehog. And then when the second trailer came out, he looked completely different from the first trailer. But it drained a lot of money from the studio that made this. And, all of this could have been avoided because I feel like currently in the traditional Hollywood system, movies are made in sort of like a black box within Hollywood. And then after everything is done, then they bring it out to the audience and they're like, what do you guys think? And so we're kind of like challenging that form of thinking. And, what would happen if even early on you were able to already engage viewers and sort of see what they think. I mean, they kind of do this on a smaller scale in Hollywood. They have test screenings for small audiences, but yeah, what if you could do this at scale? You know, what is actually the downside of just opening up the creation process, even if just transparently and not, you know, on a governance level to the audience? I feel like it would change a lot.
Part of challenging the status quo using NFTs, I feel like comes with a lot of challenges, right?
Yes.
It's a very play on words over there. And I'm trying to understand from a storyteller's point of view, from someone with your level of background, what are the various challenges that come with running an operation like you and your partner are running? And because I feel like it's just not normal, like you said, to traditional Hollywood. And it's a new concept. It's a new primitive. We've been talking about integrating our collectors in our creative endeavors for the longest time. And I think you're doing it in a very like well-respected and cohesive manner. What are the challenges that come with doing that?
I think the first challenge always is trying to get people to understand the concept in general. I think explaining Shibuya has never been sort of, and we're working towards it being something that we can explain within 30 seconds and have people understand it immediately. Thankfully, though, I think the product itself is pretty self-explanatory. So letting people use it is often a more clear and faster path of understanding as opposed to, you know, sort of explaining it in words, let's say. But other challenges, I think there's always going to be challenges when you're challenging. So many challenges when you're challenging anything of status quo, and there's going to be a lot of, you know, sort of raised eyebrows and skepticism that goes with it. And so I think to overcome that, you just have to really believe in what you're building. And I do believe in what we're building. And honestly, if it's not us who's building it, somebody else is going to, and people are going to realize sort of why this is important, especially somebody from like myself who's coming from a creative background. You understand how many creative decisions, especially working in Hollywood as well, how many creative decisions literally die in the hands of producers or people who just are not creative people making decisions on a creative project. Or how many, you know, sort of decisions are decided by sponsorships, you know, with like a financial incentive in mind. And, you know, sort of I think that's why instead of getting a lot of really new and novel original IPs nowadays, we're just seeing Ant-Man 42 or, you know, Black Panther 13.
Right.
This is kind of what happens when you sort of get into this cycle of monopolized gatekeeping, Hollywood, big budget sponsorship cycle. And yeah, I think, you know, that can always exist and there's always going to be a market for it. But I also feel like, we're just more and more lacking for resources for independent creators who have good ideas and want to be able to not wait 3 years for somebody to greenlight their idea to be able to put it out. And that's really what Shibuya is about. And, you know, we're starting with White Rabbit to show people that it is possible and it is happening. And people who watch it genuinely enjoy it. So yeah, we'll see where it goes.
I think it's going and headed in the right direction. And part of the reason, Emily, why I wanted to have you a part of season 7 is because the theme or the tagline is all about creating content that's worth collecting. And a big part of that is understanding storytelling. And you seem to have a great knack at storytelling. And I'm curious, my next question for you is like, how do you think the use of NFTs and long form animation will change the way we consume and interact with visual content? So you brought one example of being able to vote on specific scenes. Are there any other examples that make it enticing for a viewer to collect a part of White Rabbit, for example?
Yeah. I mean, something else that we built, which we already published between chapter 2 and chapter 3 was, for example, we did the Azuki casting. So anybody who had an Azuki could submit their Azuki for casting. And then, you know, anybody who's a participant in White Rabbit or Azuki can use on-chain governance voting to vote for their favorite contestant. And then the winning one got a cameo character in chapter 3. And so other things that we are actively building and experimenting with is sort of this idea of customized viewing experience. So, you know, when in sort of like an on-chain world, when you connect your wallet, everything, that's the whole point of the blockchain, is that there is provenance and this sort of collection of data of everything that's like happened. So when you're thinking about what are the possibilities in the future when just by connecting your wallet, you can see this person's viewership history or, what films they participated in. And it's super useful for taste making, for example. It's like, I only want people who like, movies that are good, or, I only want people who like a certain type of movie. This is all something that could be useful. And then I think, sort of like that, things that are coming are, for example, using AI, you can now create the same animation, a different visual style. And then so imagine a future where based on your sort of past history, and then you're connecting your wallet, then you're seeing the same animation, but in a different style than another person. These are sort of all concepts that, haven't been explored before or weren't possible in a sort of on-chain interactive experience.
That makes a lot of sense. So on the topic of I guess, funding and being able to provide capital to early ideas and fund a team, to help produce whatever creative endeavors they want to go on. I'm curious how you think blockchain tech will sort of impact the way we fund and distribute independent animation projects in the future. I feel like we're at the very beginning of that question. What does that look like down the line?
I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball and I could tell you.
Where's your crystal ball, Emily? Bring it out.
If I had it, I wouldn't share it. I don't know. That everybody is trying to figure out in tandem, right? And it can only come with experimentation and trial and error. But the most obvious point being the efficiency of just raising capital on the blockchain versus going, a traditional route from signing documents to legal wires to or bank transfers, et cetera. And so using that as a starting point, I think it's, similar to maybe a Kickstarter model, but why I personally found the Kickstarter model less interesting is because I feel like what happens is people just sort of contribute some money and they get a water bottle and they wait like 3 years to see if something happens or not. But and so this is kind of why Shibuya exists, because I was like, what if you can actually make it more interactive? And so people will feel sort of more invested and, just have a higher relationship with the actual media itself. And you are finding that people are doing that. And then, on top of that, you can do things like token gate discussions, or, I always talk about this concept of, let's say hypothetically in an idealized fully on-chain future, let's say you're a Star Wars fan and, there's currently in a Web 2, there's, let's say, discussions going on Reddit, and then there's 4chan or other forums, but they're all completely separate sites, right? But, if in the future you have some kind of system where there's like engagement tokens or something that exists on chain, then you can, sort of already just with the click of a button, source all of the biggest Star Wars fans, or, and then as a Star Wars fan, I can go on any different website and then immediately they know that I am a Star Wars fan and what I have sort of commented or contributed in the past. And I feel like these are super important. And, then you can extend this same idea to sites like Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb, and I'll let you do your own imagining of what that kind of future looks like.
It's just endless. It's everything's endless. Everything is building on top of one another. It's like very much to the DeFi saying of like DeFi Legos, right? Or financial Legos of every protocol application sort of like building on top of each other and what they built prior. It feels very much like that. And we've never really seen that at scale just yet. Let alone like I've never really been able to contribute to, let's say, like a movie like Avatar after it's been in MIA for like 10 years, something like that, until when the first one came out. Second one just came out. I loved it. I went to go see it. And I feel like my experience with a project that I actually contributed to and had a saying in its creative direction and also had some sort of financial upside in it too would completely alter the way I feel about the brand and feel about the creative animation and everything in between. I'm curious to understand what that looks like down the line at scale. Like, will we be going to AMC, and are the early contributors having exclusive showings for the first week or 2 weeks, before the rest of the public can kind of view it? And at what scale do you need to get for a franchise to be at that level of operation? You can tell I'm thinking very big picture here.
Yeah, I mean, these are really good questions, and I hope we do get there, because I actually feel like it would just make the whole sort of viewing experience that much better. I mean, imagine being right now, let's say I feel like White Lotus, for example, only started getting popular from the second season. But as somebody who started watching it from the first season, I want to be able to flex on that. But currently, other than just telling people, there's no really actual way to prove it. But obviously with on-chain provenance, that all changes. And yeah, so then when you extend further, what does that actually mean? Not only flexing to your friends, but when you're a movie distributor or something, and being able to get that data so that you provide customized experience for that specific set of people is a whole other Pandora's box that should be opened.
So I now think about like Nouns DAO, and I think about the proposals that community members sort of push to get funding for. And I think about the dynamic when a proposal is very split down the middle of yes and no. And I'm trying to think, how would that affect sort of like the experience of a viewer when they're trying to put their creative input into a specific like a side tunnel, like a side branch of a series, and half of the community is for it and half of the community is against it, and it ends up getting passed, and everybody that wasn't for it is like bummed out. Like that could probably alter the way they enjoy the film as well. How do you accompany and tailor a better experience or a great experience for those who are sort of like let down by the community? And I don't want to say let down, but I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think this is always a tough one. There's always going to be people who are let down, and I think it's not a bad thing. I feel like when you take it as constructive criticism, then you can always know where to sort of steer your ship based on feedback that is coming from the community. And I think just beyond what we're talking about in life as a general, you just have to accept that there's always going to be people who are let down. And I feel like as a creator, I think I've started to sort of more embrace, like, if I feel good about it, then that's sort of the most important.
Right.
And there are times too where things are initially let down and then way later the value is discovered, or, things like that. So, to me, at least, this is something that's elastic and not just, black and white where, it's electric now, and then it's always going to be that way.
So in crypto, the stakes are high because you have financial upside sort of in like the production and the success of the film. I wonder if there's a scenario where those who don't like it and it ended up not going their way, they fork the movie and they complete their own like rendition of what that chapter could look and feel like. And then you publish both versions and you show the world, this was the one that wasn't worked for. This is the one that kind of like went, and everybody continued with that line.
Yeah, I think
could that be a thing?
Absolutely. And, I think that's the beauty of decentralized, or, the concept of a community coming together, or community created IP, right? I do think, though, there usually still always needs to be a sort of lead creative persons to kind of guiding the community. Because if you leave completely up to a community to make something, it's either just never going to get done or it's going to be really bad.
Yeah, I think a lot sort of what needs to happen for this big picture vision to prevail is for more people around the world to become more crypto native and intact with crypto culture. Because all these scenarios and what ifs, I'm very much throwing it from the perspective of someone who's been in the space for a long time, who understands crypto culture. And typically when you don't like something, you fork it, and a lot of people are not really wired like that. But I feel like as you come into the crypto community, you start embracing those values. And that's definitely a plausible solution that a community or sub community could kind of go and pursue on their own.
For sure. I will say, though, the one caveat is that I'm sure it's much easier to fork code or a product as opposed to forking media. So, when you look at any specific film or, TV series, it's actually really fascinating. It's honestly kind of like, I was reading the Wikipedia page of the film Joker, and it's honestly like, I find movies fascinating because every movie is kind of like a mini company that just kind of gets built on the spot, and then everybody comes together and, from different expertise and contribute all these skills, and then they kind of eventually disband and then throw it out into the world and it doesn't belong to them anymore. And then, then this company, let's say, sort of dissolves. And I find that super interesting. And there's so many aspects that come into creating a piece of film that it's so hard to make right, that it would be extremely difficult, I think, for anybody to just fork a piece of IP or film and have it be good. And that's why, I think things like directors and composers are so important, and ones that are talented get so much recognition, because without them, that same source material is just not the same watching experience.
I'm curious, Emily, what goes into great storytelling?
I actually, with age, well, I think a lot of it has to do with being a sponge from a young age. So you have to consume a lot of content of all kinds. And then I think having sort of a sensitivity to understanding human psychology and why people find things interesting is important. And being able to not only being able to identify that, but then being able to dissect that and then extract the elements that you need and then put it into your own body of work is another skill set. And then beyond that, I think there's just a certain level of intuitiveness that I think a lot of people are just either you're born with it or you just don't have it. And that I think is sort of has been, I think, something that has guided me. I think it sounds arrogant to say.
No, can you give me an example of that intuitiveness that you're talking about?
I think it's like so for example, if I'm like, let's take the Uniswap V3 video, for example. It's like every artist who's worked on it, including the composer, are super talented. And, I could never do what they did, at that skill level myself. But I had to be the person to sort of tell them, it's all about feelings. Like, you just have to be a really feeling person. You have to be like, this is the feeling that people should have when, and then sort of knowing how to then describe that, or, with different, let's say, whether it's music, you have to understand, like, I would say, okay, well, towards the end, we need, sort of like an increasing arpeggiator instead of a decreasing one. That will, be the difference of how somebody feels towards this. And then with, visual medium, it's like understanding that different colors make people feel a certain way. And then so sort of being able to be a composer, all these different elements in your head, and then being able to articulate that in a vocal manner to the people who have the skills that are working on it. Yeah.
What emotions do you find yourself often triggering in a person when they consume your content? Is there a common theme that comes to mind?
I think I mainly have two hacks. So one is, when you dissect a meme, what makes a meme go viral? It's usually something that has an element of humor and also I call it like a WTF factor or something, which is what I was talking about. When people watch it, they're like, what the fuck did I just watch? That's a thing. That, I don't know why, I can't explain it, but that emotion is what makes people watch something and then be like, I want to send it to my friend. I don't know, maybe because they need their friends to validate. I thought this was weird. Can you also validate that it was weird? Or maybe you can explain to me something that I didn't understand. So that's like one hack or one path to go about it. The other hacks that I have are usually things that are psychedelic or trippy, always gets people. And then things that contribute to that are sort of the synchronization of audio and visual components without fail. If you sync something beautifully, with a beat that has a visual cue, people will just automatically say, cool.
Wow. There's so much depth into really understanding what goes into that. And
I would say those are actually just surface levels. And then when we're talking about deeper,
really? Okay.
Yeah. So
wait, now let me stretch really quick. Let's go deeper really quick. Okay.
When you talk about the deeper ones, I think it then ties into things like psychology or understanding human emotions or why people feel a certain way. And so, because, I think human emotions are so complex that already usually people just know they feel something, but they have a hard time even putting words to what they are feeling. So if you're already having a hard time putting words, imagine having to create a piece of media that then regurgitates that or recreates that feeling. But this is the beauty of filmmakers or, I would say even musicians as well, right? So I remember when I watched Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind for the first time in my life, that movie had so much feeling behind it and emotion, especially surrounding heartbreak. And when I watched that movie for the first time, I had never even experienced heartbreak before. But because that movie portrayed it so well or so beautifully, it made me curious about heartbreak. Be careful what you wish for. As I experienced it, it's definitely not a desirable feeling. I think fantasizing about it is one thing, and then actually experiencing it is another. But I was just thinking that Michel Gondry, the director, he could never have created something like that without really experiencing that himself. And then so for myself as well, really experiencing and feeling those emotions of heartbreak really changed my outlook on a lot of things and made me have a newfound level of respect. And this is the deeper level that I'm talking about. And, so I haven't gotten there, but my goal or my ultimate, I'd say maybe my purpose in life is I hope that I can get to a point where these emotions that I felt are not wasted and that I can somehow repurpose that pain that I went through in an artistic way so that it becomes useful or relatable for somebody who's watching it like it was for me.
From one creative to another, I've been playing the drums for the longest time, and you build skill through repetition and practice. And the next question I want to ask you is what does your routine look like for practicing creativity? Is that even a thing? You can practice the skill of animation and using software to create animation, but is there anything beyond that you can consistently do on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to get better at being creative?
Drugs.
Okay. Next question. Great.
Jokes aside, I think it's a combination of just being really observant, because creativity, even though things can be original, is always sort of a reiteration or repurposement of something that already exists. And it just combines in a new sort of way, like a different combination, and then something new is born. And so I often feel like creativity is like that. So without the building blocks, which is being observant of the real world, including nature, media, anything that can happen, you can't have that creativity. So I would say that's the only sort of thing that you can practice, is just to be really observant and present all the time, of what's actually happening in the world. And also, like studying emotions, sort of really just tuning into how you feel, how the world feels, how everything is feeling. It's all about feelings.
Okay. I would love to just do an experiment myself offline of what that really entails. Maybe we can chat offline, because being creative is a very hard skill, especially with AI coming out, right? And you have all these ways to write long form blog posts through just a few sentences, feeding the algorithm something, right? And those who can really innovate through creativity really feel like have an edge, and they know how to produce really, really compelling content that, in the case of season 7, is worth collecting, right? Yeah. So I'm going to try to practice that offline, and I'll let you know how that goes using what you said. So throughout this entire conversation, Emily, we talked about Hollywood at large. We talked about your journey. We talked about Shibuya. We talked about White Rabbit. The next thing I want to ask you is sort of what comes next for Shibuya. So you published White Rabbit, right? A really, really compelling video. What's next in the works? You said it's the next couple chapters that you guys are working on. What can we expect?
Well, I won't spoil too much, but White Rabbit will have 7 chapters total. So first we need to finish White Rabbit. There's going to be AI involved in the 4th chapter. And, sort of on a meta general story theme, the story will hit sort of like a climax point that I think will almost, I want to say, break the 4th wall for you as a viewer, but I can't say anything more than that. That's to White Rabbit. And then for Shibuya in general, we are in the process of onboarding new IP. We are going to announce one very soon. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but
it's coming out Tuesday.
Okay. I mean, I can probably just say it, but we're launching a new IP for the first time on Shibuya, other than White Rabbit. Cool. And it's the Replicant X stop motion animation from Steve Aoki and Seth Green's studio.
Oh, wow.
And it's really cool. And then so they're going to have a different way of interactivity with that IP. And it's going to be kind of like Mad Lib style. So totally different from White Rabbit. and it's a stop motion animation, different style. So that's pretty exciting. And that's the one IP that I can talk about currently. But yes, we are in the process of onboarding more IPs, as well as in tandem building all of these tools that prepare future creators to be able to easier facilitate their ideas and make them a reality.
I love it. I'm excited to watch Shibuya's work as it progresses over the next year, the next couple of years. Emily, before we wrap up and I let you go, where can we find you? Where can we learn more about Shibuya and everything in between?
You can learn about Shibuya on our website. It's shibuya.xyz. Okay. And I encourage everybody to just go watch White Rabbit. And, especially if you're somebody who is in the crypto space, see how many Easter eggs you can spot, or if you can sort of pick up on the messages or, sort of the subtle themes that are going on here just through the dialogue. And then for myself, you can find me on Instagram. It's just PplPleasr. It's spelled really weird. It's PplPleasr. And then on Twitter, because by the time I got Twitter, PplPleasr was already taken. So I am at PplPleasr1 on Twitter. But funny story is the person who I think was squatting the username before, later I think got tagged in a bunch of, because the Uniswap NFT, I donated all of it to charity, and then they were getting tagged in all of the charity tweets. And then so I think I remember receiving with DM, they were saying, oh my God, I realized that you must be a really good person because you've done work. So I'm just going to give you this handle for free. And then I was like, oh, it's actually so nice and wholesome. But also by the time this was happening, I think everybody had already gotten used to me being PplPleasr1 on Twitter. And so now I have PplPleasr redirects to PplPleasr1.
Nice. Well, I'm glad we had this discussion. Thank you for sharing your time. We'll have to do a check-in sometime soon as these next few videos roll out. But until then, wishing you well, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.